name's Eric McCoy, and welcome back to Recovering Through Highness. You know, as most of those who know me or have listened to my podcast or have seen my YouTube videos, I spent many years off and on delving into the psychedelic world of LSD, of mushrooms, mescaline, MDMA, and marijuana. And yes, marijuana is classified as a psychedelic. My focus today is on LSD. And the reason is because I had a student who asked me if I would meet with a relative of hers, as she had an interest in trying LSD because friends of hers told that it was fun and that it was cool. Now, as I've promised everybody to be as truthful as possible based on the knowledge that I have in my experience, I'm going to agree with her friends in the fun category. Now, I did a podcast called Stop Seeing with Your Eyes, as I told real life experiences to show how our perceptions and our view of the world can be swayed by our beliefs, by our agendas, and by our thoughts. Now, to say something is fun or makes you cool, and then looking at what is good, what is safe, or what is in the best interest are not the same things. What is LSD? What are the effects? What are the dangers? Those things I can tell you from both experiential knowledge and from book knowledge. The rest is up to you to decide. Now I'm going to take this a step further. And because I just done a podcast on harm reduction, I'm going to assume that some listening to this are going to do it anyways. Now, I'm going to explain protective factors for those who say, I'm going to do it anyways. The most important thing to remember is that whether you like it or not, you are going to pay the price if things go bad. So LSD is in a classification of drugs or in psychedelics that are called indole psychedelics. Lysergic acid diethylamide, also known as LSD, is a semi-synthetic form of an ergo fungus that infects rye and other cereal grains or grasses. This fungus was responsible for outbreaks of ergo poisoning and thousands of deaths over the centuries. There were a lot of farmers that died as a result of accidentally eating the infected grain. There was a Roman poet who wrote about a disease, most likely speaking of this poisoning. And I want to read this to you guys real quick. And this is what the guy said. The entire body was reddened by burning sores, as when the sacred fire spread over the limbs, throughout the inside of a person, so that it burned all the way down to the bones. Completely confused condition with fear and melancholia, darkened brow, and a sharp, even angry look in the eyes. Moreover, a fearfully excited hearing and buzzing in the ears. Now, being somebody that has done LSD for many years, I cannot relate to that as using it myself, but there's a reason for that, because they're talking about something different. There's two types of ergo poisoning. There's one that's called gangrenous, which is also known as St. Anthony's fire. Now, this included hallucinations with real high body temperature and a rotting away of gangrenous extremities throughout the body. The other is called convulsive ergotism, which includes painful muscular contractions, vomiting, diarrhea, headaches, mania, psychosis, delirium, and confusions, as the name says. Now, are we having fun yet? The hallucinogenic properties of ergo were not discovered until 1938 and this was by Dr. Albert Hoffman. This was also the same individual, just as a side note, who identified psilocybin or psilocin that was in what we call magic mushrooms. Now, they were looking for a circulatory and a respiratory stimulant within the fungus. Now, it was the 25th derivative they tried, and this is what became known as LSD 25. This was ultimately considered a therapy for mental illness and alcoholism. And so for people that know the history of the 12-step program, Bill W. got clean and sober in the 30s. They started Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was a period of time in the late 50s and early 60s that he used LSD. His reasoning behind what he stated for him doing it was because he wanted to help people find that spiritual experience. It was also looked at a way to investigate thought. Now, there was a medication that was actually sold in the 50s, Delicid, which is the trade name for LSD. Now, I did a prior podcast on the history of drug laws, so I'm not going to go into the controversy around the 60s, but it was made illegal in 1966, and it was classified as a Schedule 1, which basically means it's highly addictive, and there are no medicinal purposes for it whatsoever. And it was in 1974, the National Mental Health stated that LSD had no therapeutic benefits, which basically ended the study that mental illness could be cured by LSD. So what are the effects of LSD? And one is a rise in heart rate. You have a rise in blood pressure, elevated body temperature, dizziness, dilated pupils, reduced appetite, and sweating. Now, a lot of the drugs that fall under these psychedelics do also induce nausea and some of these other, because most of them are funguses. They're poisons and they're toxins. Now, its primary effects that people use it for is the ability for it to overload the brainstem, particularly the sensory switchboard, which causes distortions, synesthesia. And this is ultimately where you're seeing sounds, you're feeling smells, you're hearing colors, and other things such as an altered mood, impaired concentration and motivation, and a state of dreaminess. Now, that may not sound so bad, and actually could be exciting. Yes, but I do have more to say. One of the greatest dangers, and I've seen this many times with devastating consequences for some, is the impaired reasoning, lack of judgment, and poor decision making that again has ended in devastating consequences for some. Now, it is a myth, and some people say this in most cases, that using LSD just once can ultimately create a permanent psychotic or a schizophrenic episode or become schizophrenic. And that is a myth. But people with a pre-existing mental or instability can aggravate those conditions. So it is a myth that, so I want to say something real quick. So it is a myth that we've heard a lot, and I really don't know of any particular cases this is actually true, that LSD and using it just once can actually cause schizophrenia or put you in a permanently psychotic state. But there are people with a pre-existing mental illness or instability that can aggravate those conditions. It could trigger a psychotic episode in someone with schizophrenia or major depression because of how the drug destabilizes the balance of neurotransmitters. Is LSD for you? Well, I can't say. But what I will say is that for me, and I can only speak for myself, I know what it does personally, but I do stay away from it. And the reason is I enjoy being clean. And as I've stated many times in my podcasts, I enjoy getting high. And my highness today is something that's not temporary like drugs will give me. It's something that's permanent because highness comes from within. So, if after hearing about the possibilities of what could happen, and you still decide that you're ready to do it, make sure that you're emotionally under control, because LSD creates an anxiety and an uncomfortability that not all do well with. Your surroundings are going to play a lot into the experience that you gain, so be careful on who you're around, and make sure you're around fun people and not angry or aggressive people, because it can ultimately wear off on you. If you do have a pre-existing mental illness, don't even think about it. Remember that it is a toxin and is toxic, so be careful on the amount you take. I want to do this really briefly and a quick short one on this. And so I want to thank you again for tuning in. Recovering through highness. Harm reduction is once again the theme of this, as I don't assume everybody is going to stay abstinent. If you use, be safe. And hopefully you're going to find that great life that you're looking for. Please subscribe to my channel and send me a message. recoveryecosystem@gmail.com. Again, that's recoveryecosystem@gmail.com. My website, recoveryecosystem.net. Be safe. Love yourself. I sent a message out on Facebook that if you're using drugs, you're high and you're struggling, I love you, because I doubt you hear that very often.
They see 50 to 10